Spy X Family, or just Spy Family the manga, was originally released in Shonen Jump Plus in 2019, with an adaptation, Spy Family the show, from Studio Wit and Cloverworks airing in 2022. The story is the brainchild of Tatsuya Endo, creator of series like Tista and Gekabijin. From what Wikipedia tells me, Spy Family takes elements from some of Endo's one-shots, I Spy, Ishi ni Usube ni Tetsu ni Hoshi, and Rengoku no Ash. This show makes me happy. Not everything needs to be Requiem for a Dream or Grave of the Fireflies. As it turns out, I actually like to smile every once in a while, and if nothing else, this show is really good at doing that. Now, I'm gonna talk a lot about the inherent tragedy and existential dread I see at the heart of this thing, and read into characters in ways I absolutely do not think were intended, if I'm being perfectly honest. So, to be clear, at the end of the day, the main reason I watch this show is because it makes me happy. Okay? Okay. Spy Family follows a spy codenamed Twilight, tasked with maintaining peace between two rival nations. Operation STRIX. His mission? Take on the alias Lloyd Forger, create a fake family, and infiltrate the prestigious school Eden Academy to get close to Donovan Desmond, the head of a major political party who threatens to dismantle the existing peace. It's a premise that harkens back to old-timey spy thrillers filled with espionage and suspense. But as anyone who's watched or read Spy Family knows, yeah, it's not really about any of that. While trying to maintain his secret identity, Twilight unknowingly ends up enlisting the help of two strangers with secrets of their own. Anya, the girl he adopts, is a telepath, and Yor Briar, the woman he asked to play his wife, is a deadly assassin. Each of them try to hide their identities and abilities from each other, and with the exception of Anya, on account of, being able to read minds, they are all oblivious to each other's secrets. The story follows these characters as they grow closer together and as the Forger family, as fake as it is, starts to become more and more real. This concept isn't new to the spy thriller genre, of course. Shows like The Americans and movies like Black Widow, just to throw out some big examples, all use fake spy families in similar ways. Each person has their role. Lloyd the father, Yor the mother, Anya the child, and they all have ideas about how those roles should be played. We watch as they quickly discover, yeah, they're kinda terrible at living up to those standards. The Forgers aren't the most socially adept people in the world, to put it very mildly. What hope do they have of figuring any of this out? But as Old Lady with the world's most aggressive handshake points out, they're wonderful together. You give them ideals they can't possibly live up to. Tear them down and see what's left. The point of setting up the Forgers this way is to do what all stories with this setup do. Explore what it actually means to be a family. And it's complicated. Everyone has baggage. Lloyd's childhood was ravaged by war. Yor became an assassin out of necessity. Anya was the victim of experimentation and abuse. These are complicated people with past lives that could have been their own series, and they all choose to keep those lives to themselves. I love that. Endo sets up these characters to have their own secrets on top of being a fake family. And while it would have been incredibly easy to have those secrets threaten to tear the family apart, instead, those secrets serve to make them all weary of the happiness they've found. The biggest irony here is that if the Forgers were honest with each other, they'd probably be closer than they already are. I wouldn't be the first person to point out that Anya is the perfect daughter for Lloyd. His job is to covertly gain intel. Anya can literally read minds. Yor could go either way if she found out Lloyd was a spy for Westalis, but given what we know about her, if she knew Lloyd's mission was to maintain peace, she'd probably go along with it. These people are perfect for each other, in more ways than they could possibly imagine. But they went through the worst parts of life to get to where they are now, and came out the other end believing happiness wouldn't come easy. If they were isolated and alone in their past lives because of who they are, why wouldn't that be true now too. This is as much a story about self-acceptance as it is found family, a group of broken and imperfect strangers pretending to be a perfect family and becoming a real one in the process. It all sounds very cheesy, and to be fair, it kind of is. But like I said in my Chainsaw Man video, comedy and absurdity make cheesiness easier to swallow. And Spy Family is plenty funny and absurd. The Forgers are a bunch of weirdos.
日頃から人間をちぎっては投げてますとは言えない。
手を伸ばしたとこに偶然この人が。
何言ってるのおい。
ロイロさん。
予期せぬステラ獲得。よ。
Yeah, let's not forget that this is mainly a comedy and isn't the most serious thing in the world. Like I said, I watch this show because it makes me happy. But that isn't to say that it couldn't be more serious in the future. There's tragedy behind every character here, and in the few moments where the story does tap into that, it hits hard. I haven't read any of Endo's other works, but he seems like a very capable writer. He could take Spy Family in so many different directions. There's a lot of nuance that Endo could explore. And I think that's especially true with a character like Lloyd. Spy Family is a time bomb. Lloyd, Anya, and Yor came together understanding that their relationship is temporary. At some point, they will run out of reasons to stay together. So here's the big dramatic question at the heart of this thing. What happens when they do? That question looks a bit different for each of the Forgers, but they're all barreling towards it. For Lloyd, Operation STRIX will come to an end, and when it does, he will be faced with a choice. Strip out all the nuance, and it's pretty straightforward. The life of a spy, or a life with his found family. Of course, it's not that simple. If it was, Spy Family wouldn't exist. But to me, this question of what to choose is one of the most relatable parts of the story, because for a person like Lloyd, that question has the potential to be catastrophic in more ways than you might think. And I want to look at why. Let's lay out the groundwork first. I briefly touched on this earlier, but Lloyd's childhood was ravaged by war, and I'd imagine that shaped a lot of who he is now. It's not hard to see why someone who had everything taken from them would grow up to be a man determined to make sure no one would endure the same pain. That's an admirable goal. And while as of right now we don't know the exact circumstances that led to Lloyd becoming a spy, I'm sure that goal was a big, if not the biggest, factor in that decision. But tucked away in that reasoning is something else, and there are hints that things might be a bit more complicated. With what we do see of Lloyd's childhood, and with the way he talks about his past, there is the possibility that becoming a spy wasn't something Lloyd did willingly. Now, this is a bit of a nuanced point. I don't doubt that Lloyd genuinely wants to help people. He could have gone out of his way to be a spy for all I know, and that would make it seem like this was his choice. But that might not matter. This has nothing to do with Lloyd and everything to do with the situation he was in. If becoming a spy was the only thing Lloyd could think to do, or, what seems more likely to me, if it was the only option available to him, he might have done it regardless of what he wanted or believed. Because almost anything is better than dying alone in the streets. Desperation is a hell of a motivator. No matter the exact circumstances, whether he sought out to be a spy or was scouted by Wise, to me this much is clear. Lloyd didn't have a lot of options growing up, but he sure as hell didn't want to go back to how things used to be. There's a lot to suggest that this might have been the position Lloyd was in, not the least of which are the absolutely insane mental gymnastics he has to do to justify keeping the Forgers together. Frankie directly calls out the fact that Anya is kind of a wild card. And Lloyd knows that. He's fully aware that she's capable of jeopardizing the mission because, you know, she already did, within like the first week of meeting her. And then there's Yor, who really should be setting off alarm bells. Lloyd, my guy, you are literally the best spy in the world, capable of figuring out people's secrets through the most mundane of conversations. You're not gonna question this. Like, not even a little. Lloyd disregards or straight up ignores pretty much all the signs that point to these people being a liability. He talks about how he's losing his edge directly as a result of the forgers constantly. But the thing is, if being a spy was what Lloyd wanted from the start, if he really cared about failing his responsibilities as a spy, he could do something about it. Lloyd could have followed through with leaving Anya behind instead of going back to the same place he left her, secretly hoping she'd still be there. He could have called off his deal with Yor instead of agreeing to marry her immediately after she drop-kicked some dude falling from the sky. Sure, Lloyd can say all he wants about how his relationship with them only exists for the sake of the mission, but Operation STRIX only requires him to have some kind of family. It doesn't have to be Anya and Yor. If Lloyd is at all concerned with any of the things he says he is, he could just give them up. But there's a reason he doesn't. There's a reason why he's willing to overlook everything and keep them around. Anya and Yor make him happy. It's obvious. Lloyd's struggle is deciding between what he wants and what he thinks he has to do. And that's a difficult spot to be in. But the thing I find interesting about how Lloyd approaches that question is that he doesn't. He completely refuses to engage with it. And that's kind of weird, isn't it? Anya and Yor make him happy, but Lloyd is doing everything in his power to convince himself that they don't. He constantly tells himself that the outlandish things he does and puts himself through are all in service of his mission. But we know that's not entirely true. To me, it seems more like Lloyd would rather go on doing something he might not have wanted to do in the first place than acknowledge how Anya and Yor really make him feel. And that prompts the question, why? Maybe I'm biased, but there's one more thing that frames how I see Lloyd. It's the fact that he's an adult. We don't know exactly how old he is, but it's a pretty safe bet to say that he's probably around Yor's age, late 20s, early 30s. He's been a spy for years. It's easy to see that Lloyd was miserable. He was resigned to being isolated and alone for the rest of his life. While it's tempting to see the choice Lloyd is faced with as a chance to leave that life behind, I think that ignores a very important factor that shaped Lloyd into the person he is now. Time. Lloyd had nothing, so he became a spy, the best in the world. A decision he probably made to get out of a bad situation, whatever that was. And even if that job meant giving up on his dreams, even if it made him miserable, even if it wasn't what Lloyd truly wanted for himself, it was better than the alternative. When you live like that for long enough, you can start to justify it in any way you can. And for Lloyd, that led to a toxic belief. This job gives me a purpose, and this pain is the only way to make sure my life doesn't go back to how it used to be. We hear Lloyd say that all the time, that the reason he's so dedicated is because he is terrified by the prospect of going back to how things were. He even says something along those lines at the party defending Yor. That belief kept him going, and he was surrounded by the people at Wise who told him the same things. All the trauma he's held, every doubt he's ever had, was pushed down and buried. That was Lloyd's life for years. And then by chance, he found Anya and Yor and got a taste of a life outside of being a spy. That came with its own struggles, sure, but they make him happy. Happier than he's ever been. And the way I see it, accepting that fact would be devastating. A life with Anya and Yor is everything Lloyd has ever wanted. And it's right there in front of him, shattering all the fears that kept him going for so long. Suffering at his job isn't the only way to have a purpose. There are other ways to live. He was wrong. But if he is wrong, then that raises a terrifying thought. All the years of dedication, all the misery he went through, the isolation. If it turns out that his life didn't have to be that way, then what exactly was any of that for? Sometimes it can be easier to deny reality than acknowledge that you've wasted your time. And of course, Lloyd didn't waste his time. He's helped and saved millions of people. That's worth taking pride in and celebrating. To be abundantly clear, I'm not trying to say that altruism is bad. I think helping other people is quite good, actually. This is less about Lloyd being a strict allegory or metaphor and more about vibes, I guess. I'll be the first to admit that looking at the show like this is a bit of a reach. I don't think most people are under the same kind of pressure as Lloyd. Not everyone is faced with a choice that could end the world. That certainly isn't the case for me. But it can feel that way, especially when it comes to questioning something as important as a job or career, and the entire trajectory of your life is on the line. Attitudes towards work are hard to change, and when you're surrounded by people like the ones at Wise who reinforce those ideas, that's even more true. It doesn't even have to be malicious. Wise is right when they say that the work Lloyd does is good. Although, could you imagine if they ended up being the bad guys? That'd be wild. There's a lot of guilt that can come from not feeling fulfilled by a job that you're told over and over is important. And there are a lot of things people tell themselves to stay where they are. Maybe this isn't what you wanted, but it's a good opportunity. You should be grateful. And besides, work has responsibilities. People rely on you. If you have doubts, well, think about the bigger picture, the future. Think about all the time, effort, years of dedication it took just to get where you are. Look, those doubts, those feelings, that's life, man. That's just part of having a job. And yeah, maybe all of that is true. But what do you do if you're caught in a situation like Lloyd, having to decide between what you want and what you've been told your entire life is what you need to do? A choice that forces you to accept that you've lied to yourself for years and confirms feelings you've tried to suppress for all that time. This job is tearing me apart. And it's tiring trying to pretend that it's not. It took years for Lloyd to end up the way he did. And it's going to take a lot to undo the mindset that led him there. Personally, I find the story of a man in his mid to late 20s who dedicated years of his life to a job, slowly accepting that he's found happiness elsewhere. I find that story to be deeply relatable in a rather uncomfortable way. Now, all signs point to the fact that what I see in Lloyd isn't what Endo had in mind. Despite everything I've said, Lloyd can't just abandon being a spy, and he probably won't. Endo could lay out the pieces so that Lloyd could retire and be replaced to be with his family, or more likely, Have it so that he won't have to decide between the two. There's room in Lloyd's life to take into account his own wants and needs. This is just one way of looking at a single character given what little we know, and anything could happen from here. But the fact remains, something about Lloyd's life needs to change. All I know is that I want him to end up in a better place than he was before. I want the Forgers to stay together. This isn't a story about these characters finding happiness. They already have. Lloyd found what makes him happy. And so the question for him now is, will he keep it? As always, thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna be honest, this kinda went everywhere and I was really close to scrapping it all together, so I hope I was able to turn it into something worthwhile. But it did have some of my favorite extras, so if you'd like to see that, you can check out my Twitter. I'm at @It'sKyleRobes. Links to that are in the description. There's also a link to my Ko-fi page down there if you're feeling inclined enough to throw $1 my way. Any kind of support is greatly appreciated. I know I'm not the most active person in the world, so if you're new or been here for a while, I just want to say thank you for stopping by. It really does mean the world to me. I'll see you next time. Shoots.